Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
You down with D&D?
Yeah, you know me.
I'm down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Down with D&D. I am one of your hosts, Sean Merwin. The other host, Mr. Teos Abadia, will be joining us in 3, 2, 1.
Hello! Thanks for connecting the magical interweb wires to bring me here today, Sean.
That's right. It was tough work. I was out there on the telephone pole working all morning to get the wires connected, but here we are. We are ready to talk D&D.
And every time you lean over, you know I can see your crack. So it comes with the job.
This is true. This is true. That happens with age.
I thought it was a style. I don't know.
Well, for me, it's both. I make it look good, Teos.
Well, speaking of old people, I don't know. It's really not really. I was trying to segue to sage advice, and I don't even know that. I mean, sages are old, but I don't know.
Okay. So with that tremendously adept segue from Teos, we're going to get into our news. And the big news this week was the sage advice was updated, including a ton of errata and rulings. Some interesting, some quite arcane in the sort of when does that ever come up sense of the word. But hey, it's there, so why not?
Yeah. I have already done my job, my duty as a gamer, and pestered Jeremy Crawford on Twitter with a clarification of one of these clarifications.
Yep, you have earned your Pester Jeremy Crawford badge, your Gamer Boy Scout badge. Excellent. So what did you pester him about?
So it is this one. It's actually, I think if it's not the last thing, it's really close to it. The question is, can you gain the magical bonus of a +2 shield if you're holding the shield without taking an action to don it? And I think any one of us would have said, no, dude, what are you trying to do? And instead, the answer is yes, but only the magical +2, which says you gain it when holding the shield. You gain the shield's base armor class bonus, which is +2, only if you use your action to don the shield as normal. So then I said, wait, so can my wizard just sort of hold a shield in one hand and get a +2 magical shield bonus?
Yeah. And apparently, according to the rules, yes, you can.
Because that's what this is currently saying.
Yeah, and of course, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, obviously, it makes sense if you are donning the shield, if you are wielding it as a shield, and you're proficient with it, you would get that +2 bonus for having a shield. It's the magical bonus that we're talking about here, the extra +2. And yeah, it sounds like to me that when they made the original rule, they said hold rather than wield or don or whatever it would be where you would actually be using it as a shield, and they didn't feel like changing that wording, so they just said sure, go ahead.
It's really so beware of giving your party too many magical shields because they're all just going to hold it. Or in theory, I don't know what holding means. Could you strap it to your back? Like in the AD&D days, we used to do that, right? You would say that you had a shield strapped to your back, so if something attacked you from behind, you could claim that bonus. Because there was no wield, don, proficiency, whatever. So, and so maybe can you do that? Can your wizard put one on their back, strapped to their backpack, and you get the magical +2 from it?
Yep. And luckily, D&D is a game that you can, unless you're playing some sort of official campaign, you can rule any way you want. And my rule is, heck to the no. You do not get your +2 magical shield bonus by strapping it to your feet and being pulled around in the snow like a sled.
But that scene with Legolas, is that canon for D&D where he rides the shield? Because it seems
that's
to
true.
Help. Anyway,
if that was a +2 magical shield, maybe that's why he could be missed by so many orcs and other enemies.
Yeah. So there are a couple of other, can I go over a few quickly?
Yeah, let's do that.
So magical darkness blocks dark vision only if the rules text for that particular thing says that it does. So the darkness spell says that you can't see with dark vision. And I think that caused all of us to say, well, that's what magical darkness does. But apparently it's only this specific instance that says that and does that. So you could have if a room just said like this is magically dark, but isn't the darkness spell, that does not mean it obstructs dark vision. We would have to say so when writing for that room to convey that, which is interesting.
My question then would be, what other magical darkness is there in the rules other than the darkness spell?
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm trying to figure out when it would come up. I'm sure there are creatures that give out an aura of darkness, say.
Yeah, something like that.
And maybe that's where this ruling is necessary.
Yeah, it could be. But it's interesting because I just think that, that spell has probably caused us all to think that just that's a quality of darkness. You can't see, and it doesn't. Right. Dark vision, it's magical. But now we learn that, well, you have to actually look at that particular wording to see what it says. It also means that as writers, we have to update our wording if we want that to happen.
True. Yep. Does casting a spell while taking a short rest interrupt the rest? Why, yes, it does. According to the rules that govern short rests, you can only do things like eating, drinking, reading, and tending to wounds. So therefore, anything more than that, which includes spellcasting, would not allow you to complete your short rest.
That's surprising. I wouldn't have thought that casting a spell is strenuous, but okay, yeah.
Well, again, it's that balance between what makes sense mechanically and what makes sense sort of in the narrative that you're playing in your head.
Yeah.
Which begs the question: can you set up guards during a short rest? Because actively guarding, I would say, is more strenuous than eating, drinking, reading, or tending to wounds. You're concentrating, you're focused, you're listening, you're moving around. Of course, I've the way I drink, that's a strenuous activity. So that's it's
you are a professional.
I am. Don't try that at home, folks. So there you go. That answers that. And it sort of redefines what it means to take a short rest.
Yeah, it does.
At least for some people.
Well, and I've seen this wording before and wondered about it, right? This whole not strenuous. What's strenuous? And before I sort of felt like it was so loose a description that it's just up to me to decide. But now we're going to go and say, casting a spell, you can never do that one. Then it kind of makes you think, well, what else is like casting a spell? Because I didn't think casting light was strenuous. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
And so I don't know. It's interesting. There are also a number of like bard type abilities that I would think like playing music, isn't that more strenuous than eating, drinking, reading, and tending to wounds? But those things clearly are meant to be done well.
Right. Well, I mean, the whole point of Song of Rest is that you do it while you're resting.
Right. I guess it does specifically say so, but I don't know.
Right. I mean, that by logic, you are saying this is what you are doing while you are taking a short rest. So therefore, you can do it while you're taking a short rest.
The next one is, can I cast Animate Dead on the humanoid-shaped corpse of an undead creature such as a zombie or a ghast? And it says, no, it only works on the corpses of creatures that have the humanoid creature type.
Mm-hmm.
I find that sort of...
So, yeah.
Do they mean if I kill a ghast, now I can't animate it? Is that what they're saying?
Correct. Huh. Because it is no longer a humanoid. It is an undead.
Isn't a corpse just a... I don't think a corpse... I guess the corpse still has a type is the idea. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's splitting hairs. I mean, I could see what you were saying is while they're attacking, if you cast Animate Dead, but they're already animated. So I don't think that's what it means. I think it means, can I animate creatures that are undead after we re-kill them?
This begs for an encounter in a Acquisitions Incorporated sequel where we would have a necromancer who is urging everyone to recycle their undead and trying to find ways to do it.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. You deposit your skeleton here for a 5 copper piece refund.
It keeps trying to, find ways to make it work. Another animate is this animate objects. Does casting animate objects during a time stop spell end the time stop? And the answer is no. But commanding them with your bonus action does. And I like that, right? It follows up with the whole idea of time stop. You can't do things that are like offensive that are going to hurt. So as long as you don't command them, but you can power them up. So that's kind of a fun extra option to keep in mind for your big bads that can cast Time Stop is they can animate a bunch of objects, get them all ready to go, and then use the bonus action to trigger them attacking right at the end of the time stop.
There you go. I am taking notes down for my high level adventures.
Yeah.
So if a spellcaster is affected by slow and takes 2 turns to finish casting a spell, what happens if their target has moved out of range or out of sight? And the answer is you choose those targets of your spell when you complete casting, not when you start casting. So that clears up that little rule of it only comes into play when you have to take more than 1 turn to do something, but they're clarifying that you can choose your targets at the end.
Yeah, cool. Can a creature that burrows grapple a target and drag them into the ground by burrowing? That's one I've often wondered about, actually, because I love swallowing, grappling characters. No, a burrowing creature can drag another creature with them only if they have the ability to leave a tunnel behind. So like the purple worm specifically says it has the tunneler trait, and it can therefore grab a grappled creature into a tunnel it creates when burrowing. But an earth elemental does not have that, so it just kind of creates loose earth and moves around. It can't drag a creature into the ground with it. Interesting.
And that fixes the problem of what happens when you get dragged into the ground, but there's no tunnel there.
Yeah.
Do you start suffocating, right? How do people get to you? They don't have to, because burrowing creatures, unless they have that tunneling ability, are not able to drag you through solid ground. Can you gain? Oh, we did the shield one. Oh, you want to do the best, your favorite?
So this is my favorite. What happens if I'm polymorphed or wild-shaped into a creature with fewer than 100 hit points, Shawn, and then I'm targeted by Power Word Kill?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think since you have less than 100 hit points, you die.
Yeah, that's the answer. You die. That's pretty good.
You die.
That just so feels like Jeremy Crawford.
Yep. So don't get wild-shaped or polymorphed into a creature with fewer than 100 hit points. I believe that's the answer to that.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right. We also got new errata for Curse of Strahd, Ghosts of Saltmarsh, Storm King's Thunder, Tomb of Annihilation, and Volo's Guide to Monsters. Do you want to tick those off on the list here?
Curse of Strahd, you know, if you've been following the D&D speak, there are a number of changes to the Vistani and Esmeralda's prosthetic. Those are now distributed in the errata document, so you can move those over there as well. There are a few very minor corrections, nothing that you couldn't live without other than that. The Ghosts of Saltmarsh, generally minor changes, but there is one really big one, which is the Sea Lion stat block was like a pretty pitiful creature, and now it is potent. So they've vastly updated what the Sea Lion is. These changes are not in D&D Beyond, at least as of like 2 days ago. They probably will be soon. Maybe they already are. I'm not sure, but they were not a few days ago. So I was able to compare. The Sea Lion got way buffer. Storm King's Thunder, very tiny minor text cleanup, and then like they made crag cats are monstrosities now, and they have a speed of 30 in line with Icewind Dale.
Yep.
Tomb of Annihilation, very minor text adjustments. Volos does have some meaty stuff. Changes to various races, like kobolds no longer lose 2 points of strength. Orcs no longer lose a point of int. So this is in line with other books that had done this, including we had orcs. I think it was in Wildmount that removed that penalty. Orc trait of menacing is replaced with a new one called Primal Intuition, granting proficiency in 2 sort of nature-based skills. Some other changes like that as well. So Volos is really, of all of these, the one that's the meatiest and most important one to notice, because you might have players that actually want to make characters or already have characters with those.
Yep.
For Adventures League, it was announced that if you are affected by these, you get to change it.
Yep. And all of that errata is available on the D&D website under the Sage Advice Compendium 10 2020. So you can find all that right from the Wizards website. So tell me about this Dungeons and Dragons annual.
So this is kind of interesting. 2 different people, Daniel Kwan and Susie Ray, shared pictures sort of saying, we can finally talk about this. Here is this Dungeons and Dragons Annual 2021, which will be in Europe only. And it's a hardcover book, has a sort of Hydro 74 style cover, I assume done by actually buy them. And the picture they showed covered podcasts. So it's one of those funny things, here's a book on paper talking about what you can find online. But it had in it, the particular shown, the illustration that was shown had all these different types of, here's the acquisition thing podcast, and here's, I forget what all the different ones were there. But Susie Ray added that it has puzzles, a story, 200 puns, everything you need to know to set up your first game. It's going to be released in October in Europe only. It's interesting. It felt a little bit like one of those old TSR product catalogs, that were so fun to page through.
Right.
It's like, wow, why are they making this and only in Europe? It's so interesting.
Yeah, that's strange. I mean, when I saw Dungeons and Dragons Annual 2021, the first thing I thought of was they used to put out like the Dragon Annual from Dragon Magazine. And I was like, why are they doing that? Because they're really, I mean, there's Dragon Plus,
right.
which is all well and good, but it's not the same as the old Dragon magazines. So yeah, this is just it's interesting. Maybe they're trying to expand their European market, and so offering this as a way to get people who might be interested in D&D, give them their first taste, and with the explosion of online play and podcasts and streams, just bringing that into the consciousness of the European gaming population.
That's interesting. So I'm gonna have to have one of my friends in Europe pick this up for me.
All right.
And then 5 years from now, when we get together in person again, I can get a copy.
Right. After the long swim across the Atlantic,
yeah,
might be a little waterlogged. Hopefully it is buoyant. And the first season 10 adventure for the Adventurers League is now up on the DMs Guild, and it has reached gold seller status. So you can find that on the DMs Guild. It's DDAL 10-00. It's been out for a bit now, and it will get you from first level through third level if you play all 4 missions, and gives you a quick introduction to playing in Icewind Dale.
And, we're going to get into this when we do our Icewind Dale review, but I like that this adventure assumes you're not already in Icewind Dale, and it serves as a way to get you there. And I like that. I like people approaching a new area. So if you want to add that to your kind of Rime Icewind Dale experience, this is a way you can do it. But also, because it deals with the subject of awakened animals, can be a way to bring you into that side of the story in a nice way. Congratulations on gold already. Good job.
Thank you. It's done very well. I'm very pleased with that. And thank you to everyone who's bought it and who's DM'd it at either these online conventions that have been going around or for your home game. So I appreciate it. I hope everyone's enjoying it. But it does bring up that question of how to introduce a campaign, and it's one that we can talk about in a few minutes when we get into Icewind Dale. But it's always hard to juggle between starting in the known or going from the unknown into the known, and letting the players learn these things as they go. Because if their characters are already from Icewind Dale, you spend a lot of time explaining what their character would already know, but you're still having to take the time to explain it.
Yeah. So I tend to think players don't often know it. So going over it for the character, or going over it for the player, even if the character knows it, is still helpful. The opposite is the worst, right? If you assume your character knows all about this place, so I don't tell you about it, now we're not playing the same game the way we should.
Yeah. But role-playing wise, I always prefer to have the character and the player be on the same level. That's why I love starting with the unknown. If you're going into a strange new region, right? Going into Chult, I didn't want characters to be from Chult.
Right.
I wanted them to experience this thing just as their characters would, with a fresh set of eyes and a fresh set of wonder. And the same with this. I like that.
Yeah, I like that too.
Jobs. Every week we report on the news, and it seems like for the last 3 weeks it's amazing how many full-time role-playing game jobs are opening up, and every week there's more. WotC now has 2 more jobs opening specifically in the D&D arena: an associate game designer for D&D products and an associate development editor to rework and revise manuscripts. So they're bringing more designers in and bringing more editing in-house.
Yeah. Chris Perkins said something on Twitter like, this only comes up once in a dragon's lifetime for associate game designer. And
yeah,
I guess, I don't know, I feel like a couple have been hired recently, but maybe, I don't know. It was interesting. I thought that was an interesting comment. Either way, this is another of those opportunities that if this is your dream, this is a cool thing to apply to for sure.
Yeah, and because it's associate, they're not necessarily looking for someone who already has 20 years experience in game development.
Yeah.
This is a sort of an entry level game designer job. I'm sure they're looking for someone with experience, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the same experience you would need if it was a full-time regular or lead game designer.
Right.
And Monty Cook is hiring a managing editor. And at about 1 million words a year, give or take,
that's very
you'll
cool.
be jumping right in.
Yeah, they say they produce around 750,000 words per year at the company, and they want you to make them even better. One thing that's always interesting is when someone leaves a job, what they say about it, right? And we just had the person who's the community manager, Darcy, leave. And if you read her thread and her posts on these things, it's like they're having a tearful goodbye for each other, right?
Right.
And she's sad to leave, and they're sad to see her leave, and that tells you a lot about the company and the kind of what it's going to be like to work there. And so that's a kind of interesting way to, when you're looking at a job, one of the things you can look at is how do people behave when they leave, right? And if they leave happy like that, that's a good sign, right? So Monte Cook is hiring a managing editor. I think that's a super exciting job to have at Monte Cook Games. They're also hiring a community relations coordinator and an academic intern for the winter-spring 2021 period. They are known for being one of those few RPG companies that pays well, that has retirement plans. So this is a really impressive opportunity as well.
Yeah, and they're in Seattle as well, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Though I think some of these, but they are fully remote, and so I believe all of these positions support you being wherever you want to be, which is a nice advantage.
All of them for Monte Cook Games.
Yeah, all the Monte Cook Games.
Not the Wizards ones.
I think the Wizards, you still have to be, even though they may be working remotely now. The idea is that you've got to be in Seattle to maintain this.
And that's the huge thing right now, right? For everyone.
Yeah.
But game design included.
Yeah.
So tell me about Rime, Anne Gregersen's new Kickstarter.
So actually what I was saying here is she is one of the authors of Rime of the Frost Maiden.
Oh, yes.
Anne Gregersen. And she's also done a number of really neat DM's Guild book materials, products. And she has just launched a Kickstarter that ends November 4th. It's called Aaralyn's Stolen Notes to Velea. And it is actually a reprint of something she put out 2 years ago. And it is a 5e campaign setting molded by sin, virtue, and monstrous corruption. And the basic concept here is that there are entities known as aspects that are more powerful than gods, and they resemble the 7 sins and 7 virtues. They have challenged the gods at various points, been locked away. Apparently they've gotten out. They can corrupt creatures, though that corruption can be restored if you do it correctly. And the PCs, they're kind of 2 bits of kind of what the campaign is like that are shown. One is that you join guilds, sort of the more mortal side of things, and the guilds sound interesting, but you also are a champion to the gods. And so over time, you're proving yourself and gaining powers and clearly traveling the realms. There's a lot here, new races, over 20 subclasses. So link is in the show notes. It's called Aaralyn's Stolen Notes to Velea.
Nice. Speaking of Kickstarters, Jeff Stevens on October 6th, so a couple of days prior to one day after we record, 2 days before the show goes up, this will be launched on Kickstarter. It's 15 short 5e adventures with new art, custom art and maps, new creatures, new magic items. suggestions on how to incorporate Tome of Beasts and Creature Codex monsters. The team of writers are a veritable who's who of your game and adventure writers for 5e, like Kat Kruger, MT Black, James Intricasso, Cat Stevens, Sly Flourish, Greg Marks, Tony Brislow, many, many more. And this is, again, called Adventures of the Potbellied Kobold. Yeah. And he also released, Jeff Stevens, his company also released Encounters in the Savage Arctic very recently, which you can find on the DMs Guild. So one new release on the DMs Guild, and then one new Kickstarter coming out soon.
Jeff Stevens, I think most people know him by now, but he is at that MT Black level of consistently putting out good products, consistently collaborating with other people in good ways. Super nice guy to meet at conventions. You and I have both met him. He is, one of those guys who just really loves the game, loves writing, wants to make this their full-time job, right? And so this is an opportunity to help with that with Adventures of the Potbellied Kobold.
Yeah. Yep. It's a good melding of good business sense and good person and good quality product.
Yeah.
He's got it figured out pretty well. So he is not going to lose a great deal of money, but still provide a good pay for the writers and a good product for the consumers.
Let's stay on Kickstarters. We can do it, Shawn.
Oh, okay. Another Kickstarter that's out there is the Three Musketeers graphic novel Kickstarter. So while it's not specifically D&D, it is being done by two people near and dear to our hearts, Scott Fitzgerald Gray and Aviv Orr. Scott was the editor, managing editor for our Acquisitions Incorporated book, and Aviv was the artist that did some absolutely spectacular art capturing the feel of Acquisitions Incorporated. And so they're combining their talents to create this Three Musketeers graphic novel, a classic tale, but not exactly the way you remember it. So they're updating the novel, written in French, of course, and then translated. They're updating it for the modern day sensibility and storytelling. And so that's what Scott is doing for his part. And Aviv is adding her artistic talents to illustrate the story. And so if you've never read Three Musketeers, this might be a good way for you to take in that story. Because, it's an old novel, originally written in French. So it's got a sensibility that might be foreign to a modern audience.
You mean it has a certain je ne sais quoi?
Yes, exactly. So this might be a good way to capture the spirit of that story with a modern twist.
Yeah, it took me about 0.2 seconds to back this.
Yeah,
because I wanted to take in the whole Kickstarter page before I hit back. Otherwise, I would have done it faster, But this is for sure. I mean, just wonderful. I know that these are two people who just create quality. They ooze imagination. They are superb human beings, and I could not back this fast enough just for those reasons. But also, I really like what they're doing with retelling this story. And you kind of should visit the Three Musketeers graphic novel Kickstarter page so you can just read through how they explain to you what this is doing differently and how exciting it is. So, highly recommended.
Absolutely. You want to talk to me about Zargoth's Tome of Familiars, speaking of Kickstarters?
Yeah, we've covered a lot of Kickstarters. The last one is really just like, do you like adorable familiars? And even if you don't,
yes, I do, Teos.
Well, there might be more for you anyway, but most of us probably would. And if you go to the Zargoth's Tome of Familiars, which ends November 5th, you can, right up at the very beginning, it says, click here for your free PDF. And if you look at the free PDF, it's kind of like going to the pet shop and you immediately want to go, can I take it home? There's like a cute little basilisk whelp, and there's a blink dog pup and a displacement cub, and you name it, right? And it goes further than that, because it's not just like, here's cute familiars, though, I mean, that's good enough for everybody. But there's a system by which you can take feats so it becomes more ingrained into the theme of your character. So you're getting these through a feat process. And there are categories. There's things like, if you're an artificer, you can get a clockwork spider. If you're a necromancer, a floating skull. There's even symbiotic hosts like the spineworm. For the Alchemist in You, the green ooze, like there's a lot here. It looks really fun. It's all 5e, 5e stat blocks, and very interesting to see how this whole feat system works. But it's certainly, did I mention the flailing snailing?
The flailing snailing.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. Get your flail snail miniature.
Nice. So that was our Kickstarter portion of the program. A couple more things to discuss. A good friend of ours and a friend of the show, DM David, gave us another blog post. This one on illusionism and false choices, which, for adventure designers and campaign designers, DMs, it's a very important topic. And I'm going to let Teos speak to this one as well.
Yeah, David gives an example of a high road and a low road, and how a DM might set this up that regardless of which way you go, you meet the ogre that's on the road, right? The characters feel they had a choice. They actually didn't. They may not know that unless they go like, hey, now let's go the other way. But while they may feel there was choice, there was no actual impact to the choice. And this is what he terms illusionism. And he says, this is fine. Like, it's not bad because it's better than nothing. There wasn't just one road. You got two roads out of it. You made a choice, and you felt like maybe there was I made an ogre this way. But he cautions us as to when we should use this technique, when it can go too far. And so this is really a great read. I really liked thinking through this, and I actually found myself applying this to Rime of the Frost Maiden. And as we do this deep dive, which of these elements we're looking at are actual choices, and to what extent do we feel as characters playing through them and as players playing our characters through them that we really are making choices that have real impacts.
Yeah. So you can find that at dmdavid.com. That's his blog. It's Faking Choices for D&D Players. So check that out. Give it a read. Let us know on our forums what you think of what he said and how you handle such a thing in your games. And now, of course, we will end with our Teos Talks minis. Miniature corner.
I don't know.
So tell us what's up with WizKids here.
Two really quick things. Well, first, I got a giant bunch of miniatures, so I'm in miniature corner right now. But one thing I did not get because it was announced just recently. There's a new adult black dragon figure, $70, more than 9.4 inches tall. And there was a period of time when we used to bemoan that WizKids was only putting out these sort of frail-looking tiny dragons, and that we got nothing like the old gargantuan dragons that we had during the 3rd edition days. Well, someone there heard this, and they are now, it's an onslaught of big, beefy dragons that are being released, and the black dragon is the latest. I am down with this. Bring it my way. I just picked up the sapphire dragon and I picked up the white dragon. Those are both big, beefy, good sculpts. I think on Twitter I'll be sharing those, if not on my blog. It's pretty cool. The next piece is really, my brain's still processing this. WizKids, who makes these plastic minis, is now releasing 2 papercraft sets for Icewind Dale themed houses. It's really hard to conceptualize because the pictures are actually 3D rendered sculpts using the same kind of visuals as always. So they look plastic on their website because it's this 3D rendered image, right? But apparently they're papercraft. And so it's $16 for what they call the lodge, which is a building. I don't think you can go inside it. I think the idea is you just, you take these probably plastic coated paper pieces and you assemble them and you've got a building and your miniatures can move around it. $30 gets you the 10 town set, which has 3 buildings, an apothecary, a tavern, and a residence. You can check out the WizKids shop.wizkids.com site to look at them, but again, the pictures make it very hard to know what this final paper version really will look like. So stay tuned.
Interesting. A good friend of the show, old school DM Randy Farmer, is super into papercraft. So, we've had him on the show before to talk about papercraft, and one of the questions I asked was, is papercraft a thing that we might see from companies? And this was a couple years back. So we, in fact, are to the point now where there are enough consumers lined up that maybe papercraft is a way to go.
Very interesting.
And with those announcements and news, we are now to our main topic, a continuation of our look into Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. We have taken, yes, we have taken our time getting through the first parts of the book. And so now we begin on chapter 1 called The 10 Towns. And strangely enough, we don't start exactly with the 10 towns in this chapter. We start with a section called Running This Chapter, which for me was actually very good. I was pleased to see that they took the time to, just in a few words, give some bullet points on running this chapter. So if you are a brand new dungeon master, and you might be lost with this big tome in front of you and so many words and an index and a table of contents that seem to jump all over the place, how do we get started? And it tells you, read the rest of this section called 10 Towns Overview. That will tell you about these 10 towns. So we're going to start in the 10 towns. So here's what you need to know on a very high level about the 10 towns. Then it tells you to determine which town you're going to start in. So the adventure assumes that you're going to be in one of these 10 towns. And we've already talked about how we prefer kind of a getting there adventure, or a getting there, at least a scene that moves you into the area you're going to adventure. But this is starting you right there in the 10 towns. There is a table where you can actually roll randomly to go to one of the towns, or you can choose from them based on the descriptions that you've just read. And then you can decide where you're going to go from there. If you're going to start with one of the 2 starting quests, or if you're going to start with a quest that's introduced in one of the 10 towns, because each town has its own separate starting quest that you can use. And then whenever a character arrives in another town for the first time, there's a nutshell description that you can give the characters so they can get acclimated to this new place before they get into the quest itself.
Yeah, so how do you like this system? Like, I'm with you that I totally love the way it's written. I think this is very nicely written.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good way to help DM get their grounding. But what do you feel about the overall approach of, there are 2 starting quests. You could choose either to start with, or you could choose the quest that's in the town and pick any town, or even roll randomly.
I like it for the simple reason that it should show new DMs. This is all about new DMs for me, right? Experienced DMs already know how to make changes to what they want to run. So if you give a new DM, or if you give an experienced DM a linear adventure, they're going to do whatever they want with it because they know how. If you give them an event board, right, a quest board kind of adventure, they know how to put those pieces together to make a campaign for the most part. And I'm talking about a DM who's, either been a player for a long time, so has seen DMs do it, or is DM'd for long enough that they understand how to put their own campaigns together. So this is all about new DMs. And for me, it gets across the point that there is no one right way to run a campaign, but it's not so overwhelming that they're out in the middle of nowhere, because it says, here are these 2 quests and 2 starting quests. Those 2 quests are not pages long. They're relatively short, relatively concise, pretty simple to understand. Then there's this 1 extra quest. If you feel like doing that, so this assumes that a new DM is going to read through, the starting town information and pick a town and then look at one of those quests. If one of those quests are too complicated, which some of them might be for a brand new DM, they can always choose a different one, or they can always go back and just use Cold-Hearted Killer, the first quest, or Nature Spirits, the second starting quest. So I'm okay with it. I think it does push the envelope a bit, but I don't think it's so overwhelming that a reasonably able reader can't follow what's going on. How does that strike you?
I'm a little bit on the other side. And
Okay.
one of the things is, what's our job here is sort of like we're reviewing it critically, right? We're analyzing this, and I'm for sure a super analytical person. And when I look at this, I think that kind of our job for this podcast is sort of say, hey, as a DM, what might you run into? What factors do you need to consider? That's sort of what we're doing as our job. So let me pause and say that I think this is a wonderful adventure, and anybody who worked on this should be really happy with it. It's awesome. When I put on my critical brain space, this is fine, and I like what you're saying. I can buy into that, but I tend to think, and maybe I'm just more of a linear person, that I would rather put my energy into a narrative that's more strongly crafted and put together, and that for a new player, a new DM, would not possibly result in it being shaky and tough. Because this reminds me of someone who was telling me about when they started DMing 5e, they used Curse of Strahd. And they said, I would review the spot where they were going, and then they would very quickly decide to go to another place. And I hadn't prepped that. And I would realize, oh my God, there's all this going on, and I need to now understand this other place. And they would throw them off every time, right? And this, it feels simple. It feels like, hey, all you've got to do, DM, is read up on this town. But it's very easy for that town to be a really short town. Or maybe they're on one of these starting quests of Cold-Hearted Killer Nature Spirits, which are sort of a travel around one. Maybe not. It's kind of complicated. And so you could easily have not prepped for what you end up having to run. And now you feel like, oh God, what am I doing? Or the quest didn't last as long as you thought it would. Or maybe it goes on forever and you're like, wow, this is not what I was expecting. Or I'm on this Cold-Hearted Killer track or Nature Spirits track, but there are things here that lead to the town's quest, but it told me to run one. There's sort of, its open nature can be conflicting for a new DM.
It can. And I agree with that. What I want to have my text do is train the person reading it to get better. And so that's why I like this. I'm not saying it's done perfectly, but I like this getting right out in the open. Here is a path you can take. I almost wish it had said, you may get off that path by the choices of your players. So read ahead, make sure you understand at least the beginning of different quests in different towns. But I don't want even a starting DM, I don't want to put on this path and do them the disservice of thinking that every adventure is going to run as smoothly as it can every time, even if it's super linear, because that's not how the game works, right?
Sure.
That's not how players work. That's not how the rules work even. It does take you as the DM some imagination and some improv right from the start. So here are the tools that we can offer you. Be prepared to use that hammer as a chisel if you have to, because that's what players are going to throw your way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think if I were to make a recommendation here, what I would tend to think is I would pick a town to start in that is not too shallow. This is what I do, what I would recommend to DMs. Others may have different recommendations. Pick a town that is, either big or medium, so that you'll be there a bit, to let you get your grounding in, give you some time to develop the place. Start with whatever the quest is in that town, so that you're in that town for a bit. They won't immediately leave it. And then, as you're there, give them one of these other starting quests, so that they have a reason to travel. And if necessary, doctor it, so that you will slowly do that other one traveling as well. That would be my recommendation for this. Yeah, and that makes it compromise between the two, maybe.
Yeah, I think that would have been a good compromise. Would have been, the next bullet point in the running this chapter section would be, if this is your first time DMing, or if you want a pre-planned way, start in Bryn Shander.
Yeah.
And run that quest first, then go to Cold Hearted Killer, then go to Nature Spirits, and that will give you a good path to get your characters to second level without having them being too tempted to go to any other places.
Yeah, and part of what's going on here too is, we talked about this last time, that the way it works is when you do your first quest, you're going to gain a level. And that's going to let you handle other things. And when you run just, I think it's like 4 or 5, like then you're done. So, and there are 10 towns and 2 starting quests. So there's way more to be done than you can actually do. And so another thing for the DMs is you want to kind of read over this to see what are the must-run quests, the ones that really jive with you, right? That you go, I want to run this one. I definitely don't want to skip this, so that you can point your players to that. And then the ones that you like the least or that aren't in your comfort zone, you can just, those will never show up.
Right, you're the DM. You don't have to put these quest hooks in front of them, right? The little NPC with the exclamation point above his head, doesn't need to appear. It's as easy as that.
I think. So, can I just say that you just made me realize someone should sell, I don't know who it is, it's WizKids, somebody, a little hat with an exclamation point that would be an official D&D one, right? That you could put on when it's like, hey, players, don't miss it. You're talking to this NPC that's the quest giver.
Yeah. And then, like, if I'm reading box text, I put on one hat. And if it's time for initiative, I put on another. I love that idea.
One with James and Picasso's face for box text.
There you go. Wow, we should start manufacturing those hats.
That's it. And today is the day our business began.
That's, you all witnessed it here.
Merwin
Aviv. So the next town, or the next section, says starting town, and that's got the table where you can roll a d10, surprisingly, with 10 towns, and come up with a random starting town. And a random starting quest from that town, or you can just choose amongst them. What is this fascination with tables?
It is sort of interesting, right? I'm not a random table person at all, but I mean, I do like it for wacky things, right? If I want to know, like, which of my limbs goes strange, then I'm all for a random table. Right. But I would look over these, and I'd probably pick East Haven as a starting town. Okay. There's a lot going on. There are several quests. There's a formal quest, and there are a bunch of sort of little interesting sidebar things, which strangely would not grant you XP because you're sort of leveling up after a quest, but they're not quests. But whatever, there's lots to do here. And so I would probably pick a place like East Haven that has a lot going on. You get grounded in it. Or the other thing I might do is choose Goodmead, where if you want to go with the political route, your characters could actually become politicians. And I think if you wanted to make a linear adventure, you could actually be like, start in Goodmead, become elected, maybe, or fail. And then the rest of the campaign could be colored by that, right? You're either now responsible for this town, so you're doing all these things out of that, or you lost, and because of how you lost, you're now kind of still responsible for that town. And that will guide you through and everything. In fact, I'd have the person attend a meeting between all the speakers, right? Yeah. And hear about all the problems that are going on. It would really get the stakes going, right? So that's true. Yeah, I would never roll randomly to see where I start. That's me.
Yeah, same with me. But people seem to love tables, so randomness is a big part of role-playing games. So I guess if you're into role-playing games, you might have that spirit already.
Yeah, and it's interesting to compare this, versus something like in Dragon of Icefire Peak, where there's like that job board, right? And you see like 3 things that have been shoved out the door, and you get to decide which are the ones you want to take, and then come back and see if it changes, right? So this is a different model than that, less linear, more open.
Yep. And and then there's nothing wrong, again, with linear adventures. Sometimes they are the easiest way to run a complicated or involved narrative story. Or if you're new to DMing, it's, there's not much of an easier way to prep than knowing exactly which encounters you're going to be running in which exact order.
And whichever way you play it, the important part is to think through why your campaign why your campaign is being run way or the other, and make sure that you're not overlooking the other side, right? So if you're just sandboxing this, don't be so sandboxy that the players have no narrative linking things together, right? It must still matter and have an overarching story so it feels cool and heroic and important. But if you're all linear, don't make it feel like you're just on this total railroad and you have no options and can't affect any change, right? So
read DM David's blog post on illusion.
Yeah, totally.
That will tell you exactly how to do it. Now we get a little info on character advancement. What they suggest is advance to second level after completing your first quest, advance to third after completing 3 more quests, and then advance to fourth after completing 5 quests in the chapter. So it's after 5 quests, you're at 4th level, which is for a lot of people where the real power of your character blossoms, 4th and 5th level. So that's what they suggest. You don't have to follow that suggestion, depending on how fast you tend to run, how important it is for your players to advance versus just having the fun of role playing and being within the setting. You may want to slow that down a lot.
And this is perhaps the biggest example we've seen of how Wizards is turning away from experience points, right? Like often it's been it's clearly recommended that you not follow it and just deal, but here they're really like, it doesn't matter if the quest was small or huge. You faced off one monster and talked it down versus went through a whole keep and cleared it of bad guys. Doesn't matter. That's a level either way, right? And
yeah, I mean, if you run the Nature Spirit starting quest, it literally could take you 10 minutes,
right?
Unless you have the urge to drag it out. So you could be second level after 10 minutes of play, following these, and that's again, there's nothing wrong with that. I do know that some players, especially players that have played for a long time, still sort of cling to this experience point process. And I understand it. I understand that you want to gain a reward for completing an encounter.
Well,
especially
I think,
combat encounter.
When I've looked on Twitter, when folks have asked, and this is never science, but when folks have asked, like, hey, do you like experience points? It's actually a lot of people that like experience points.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I don't need them. I run campaigns without them and have been for, it feels like forever. But there are a lot of people that like experience points. And so it's worth thinking about if you're a DM running this is so clearly divorced of experience points. How can you keep your characters feel like they're rewarded, like things are coming their way? And, maybe you just want to even say to them, like, hey, quests equals levels. That's your XP. Get quests done. That's your sense of accomplishment, or find something else. And they do give you a new mechanic, which is reputation.
Yeah, that's true. It's not necessarily a mechanic so much as a way of turning success into a role-playing feature. So what they say is, as characters complete their quests, their reputation spreads. For better or for worse, they become known. So if you finish the quests for certain towns, the people will start treating you well. They will respect you. They may give you free things. Whereas people from the other towns are like, you're the away team. Oh, great. Yeah, you saved East Haven. What good does that do us here in Dugan's Hole? None whatsoever. Thanks a lot, losers. So it's an interesting way to think about the narrative for me, to remember that as they gain levels, they gain fame, and fame is a double-edged sword. It can be that in fantasy settings as much as it is in our real lives.
Well, this is something where you could, if for those players that like experience points, maybe you create a sort of fake reputation system and you give them reputation points. Hey, everybody, you get a reputation point.
Right. Yeah.
What does that mean? The same thing it always means in this as written, but you're and maybe you just make a few more notes. And in fact, this is probably worth doing anyway, is to take this idea that's fairly loose and open and make yourself some actual notes as you're running the campaign that when they get to this town, the reputation needs to kick in, right? So this is my third town, their third level. Here's what's happening and how they react to you. And then next time, here's how they react to you. And throw in some scenes with characters, with NPCs that would reflect their reputation level.
Right. And that's a good way to enhance role playing without falling back on things like racial tensions, right? It's not, oh, you're the orc and I'm a dwarf, so therefore I hate you. Right. That's what we're trying to get rid of in the game. Yeah. But what you can say is, oh, you are that adventurer who did this thing for that town. Well, now everyone's going to that blacksmith in that town. I'm the blacksmith in this town, and I've just lost my income. Thanks a lot.
Love it.
Right. That's a role-playing hook that relies on what the characters did, not who the characters are, which is, I think, what we're shooting for.
Yeah. So the next session gives you an overview of 10 towns. I think probably we can just go over the towns when we're going through them individually. They give you more information here about dog sleds and axe beaks as mount options that, as we said before, are sort of a little strange in why you choose dog sleds, because they have to rest after an hour. That winter survival gear is here. They talk a little bit about the town. One thing that's interesting is they changed the lore in a few ways. This one I think is just maybe weird wording, but they say that Bryn Shander, the way they describe it sounds like Bryn Shander was the first one built, when it's actually historically the last town that was built. So depending on whether you care about those things, you can make a decision one way or the other. They also introduced that most of the towns contain trace evidence of the immigrant cultures that birthed them. So Goodmead, for example, was originally founded by Chultan settlers, which is, wow, that's totally new, and that's cool.
Right. Yep. So you'll see carvings, like Chultan carvings that you would normally find there on the buildings of Goodmead.
And then you get a Snowflake System. So this is this rating for each town. What do you think of this, Shawn?
I liked it. I think it's, quick shorthand, friendliness, services, and comfort. So I don't even need to read everything else. If I know that this town has a 1 snowflake friendliness, I know immediately how to start playing the NPCs. I don't even need to read any further. Services and comfort, same thing. You're looking for plate armor. Well, not in any of these towns unless they have a 3 snowflake for service. And, same thing for resting. Oh, you're going to rest in a 1 snowflake comfort town. You are probably not going to get a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
You may need to make a Constitution saving throw or suffer exhaustion, because you're sleeping, in the attic of a building that has no heat. Yeah. Basically.
It's probably,
so, all of that's interesting.
It's worth noting that the material in this book is less extensive compared to the lore information that's in Legacy of the Crystal Shard. We talked about that book, the D&D Next adventure that has an adventure book and a lore book. That setting book is actually more expansive. About 4 years or so, a minimum of 4 years have passed since that book, so it's not that long. Amazingly huge changes have happened due to this harsh weather. So some of the towns are like half the population they used to be. Yep. But you can get a lot of value out of that other book. So I do suggest folks pick that up.
Yeah. And you have to remember, too, that was a product that came out while the rules were still being rewritten. So they had to focus on something. They didn't necessarily want to focus too much on the rules. So going for the lore there is a filler, a good filler. And the last section we'll talk about today, before we get into the adventure quests themselves, is this idea of sacrifices to Aaralyn. I'm sorry, Aaralyn. So I was personally surprised that this made it into the book.
Yeah.
Because some towns sacrifice food to the frostmaiden. Some sacrifice warmth. They won't light fires during certain times. But some towns, and surprisingly, the larger towns, they sacrifice people. And it's not necessarily the stereotypical B-movie, horrible cleric to death god standing over the altar with a dagger. It's they tie them out in the cold and just basically let them die, or force them to wander off without cold weather clothing, as a way to appease Aaralyn. And human sacrifice, not something that I understand. It's a trope. It's a trope that's been around forever, and it's one of those things probably better left unmentioned.
Yeah. But it's been 4 years since heroes defeated Aaralyn. Like, man, 4 years later, we're sacrificing people to her again. Like, we can do this, folks. Like, also, like, all right, Dugan's Hole is, living without fires and just huddling for warmth. Why are the big towns why would you not want to do that? Or they're giving away food, right? Like,
Right.
Why wouldn't the large town give away food? It seems like way better than killing off your people. Like, I like it. I like it in the political and social aspects of it. I like, because we're going to have a lottery, and surprisingly, none of the wealthy, none of the powerful people or their families ever come up in this lottery. Yeah.
So there's that aspect that I think is fun to explore, right? It's a good role-playing thing. It's a good social thing. You can do some cool things with it, but it's the actual idea that good people are killing people for this reason just doesn't jive with the ethos that we're trying to get with in this game.
I would change this, or maybe have the threat that various towns are thinking about it. But it is strange to me that sort of the friendlier, more established town is considering sacrifice, and then on the far end of the scale, you're giving away food, and just 3 years after you beat Aaralyn, something about that whole and
it's also, well, it goes along with what I just said, right? It's a good story starter, but it's not a good story finisher, right? You want to be the characters that, they just sent this poor sap out into the Arctic to die, closing the doors on him, not letting him back in. Let's go save him. Right. That's what I want to see.
Right.
And I want it to be done by the bad guys, not the good guys.
Yeah. And
not the normal people.
Yeah. And there isn't really a lot here. When you visit these various towns, it's not like you show up in a town and everybody goes, "Oh, this is so terrible. We want to stop this," or "We're protesting that our leader's thinking of doing this." It's really some of the most reasonable leaders are actually behind this, and no one's batting an eye. And I don't love this aspect of it, and I would probably change this, or either move it away, and have different types of sacrifices that they're doing, right? That more along the food and ice sculpting, whatever. Like, something that's they're caving to the will of Aaralyn is psychologically hard enough than to actually be killing off their own people. Yeah.
Well, I think we have done an episode of Down with D&D, Teos. Next time, we will get into the actual quests, cold opens to starting quests, and then each of the 10 towns and the quests that go along with them.
I'm excited about that. There's some fun aspects of those quests.
I am too. As I read this, I am more and more looking forward to running some of these. And to all our patrons out there, thank you so much for your support. And to our listeners, thank you for taking the time to spend with us talking about D&D. If you would like to support the show, you can support us on our Patreon at patreon.com/mmp. Or if you are a listener please share the good news of Down with D&D on your social media. Speaking of social media, Teos, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at AlphaStream. I visit the Misdirected Mark forums, and you can find me on my blog at alphastream.org.
You can find me on Twitter at Sean Merwin or on those aforementioned forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com. Down with D&D is a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs. So, Teos, now that we have entered Icewind Dale, what are we going to do now?
Let's go kill some monsters in a snowbank.
It's too cold.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
You down with D&D?
Yeah, you know me.
I'm down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?